There's a new Elite Xbox controller coming, but it's not from Microsoft. In the past, we have seen third-party Xbox controllers hit the scenes, and they've always been kind of meh. And if you're from my generation, you'll obviously remember the Mad Catz name. And no, we're not talking about Mad Catz here. We're actually talking about a controller that I think is going to be challenging the Elite series controllers from Microsoft, but it's coming from ASUS. So let's just take a look here and just dive right into the details. So this controller that you were looking at right here was announced yesterday at CES by ASUS, and it's called the Raikiri. I believe that's correct. Raikiri Pro, specifically for this model. And as you can see, without a doubt, there is an OLED display and RGB right built into the controller. And that is a pretty big differentiator between other products that we see from third parties that are usually trying to go to that budget-friendly route or sometimes in between. Although you can't ignore controllers like SCUF as well. Either way, let's just kind of dive into the details here, because I think this controller is super interesting, but I'm also kind of curious, like, who's it for? And we'll get into that detail here in a second. First off, the specs. So that is a 1.3-inch OLED display, and I believe it's black and white only, but it's a 128 by 40 resolution, so you're not super high resolution or pixel density here, but again, this is on a controller, so just obviously keep that in mind. Now, interestingly enough, this controller, which features tri-mode connectivity, so it has Bluetooth, low latency 2.4 gigahertz RF mode, and wired USB-C. Now, the downer here, much like many, I think actually all third-party controllers, this thing will not connect directly to your Xbox. If you want to use this on your Xbox, you're gonna have to use it like a peasant with a wire. Now, I know some people prefer wire. I am definitely not one of them, but if you want to run a USB-C cable across your living room, you're more than welcome to do that, and this controller will work with your console. Now, the question becomes then, if it's not for the console, what's it for? ASUS really, in a lot of their marketing material for this, it seems to be pitching this at the PC, which I think makes a lot of sense too, because the PC gaming with a controller is a very popular configuration these days. And so this could be a top tier spec controller for that type of a scenario. And with Bluetooth, which if you're using it on a PC, please don't use Bluetooth. Just wire that bad boy in, because you're probably already sitting by the console, and Bluetooth just isn't always a great solution. There's too much risk there. But it's fine for like keyboard and mice, but not for sensitive things like gaming. So it also has a built-in ESS DAC or DAC, so you're going to get supreme audio. They don't use the word supreme, but that's what they talk about. There's also a mute button as well. So the question becomes, what is that display used for? Well, the display can be used for lots of different things. It can be used to show battery life, mute button, if your mic is muted, just a couple other random things. What would be cool is like if you're playing Call of Duty and it showed your kill-death ratio. We're not getting that detail yet. We would need some sort of developer tie-in for something like that. And then just other various little displays and other like scenes can show. You can have wallpapers show up there. So not a ton of functionality, but the battery life is definitely helpful. If your mic is muted, is definitely helpful and welcomed. And so, yeah, we'll wait and see. I'll be curious to see if ASUS opens that display up to third parties. Also, on the back of the controller, there are selectable like paddle sort of things. They're built-in buttons. I guess they're paddles. You'll see here, they show them off here. Now, this is a hacked together video that I created from their keynote, so some of the transitions are a little bit odd, but you can see some of the finer details here of this controller, and the triggers on the back are also selectable actuation. You can see the paddles there, much like on the Elite, where you can adjust the depth of the pull for the actuation. So you can have short triggers or long triggers, but you can see the paddles there on the back, and those are, of course, the triggers that are possible. So again, this comes from ASUS's CES thing, and unfortunately, like all things CES, we don't have a price point or a release date, and so it's like, yeah. We have two models. We have the Raikiri and the Raikiri Pro, but we don't know the price point, and we don't know the release date. We'll talk about price here in a second. But as I was looking at this, I was like, man, haven't we seen this controller before? I mean, we've seen, like, this feels really familiar, and I was like, wait a minute. This was the Microsoft patent that was published, I believe, sometime in early to mid-December that shows very clearly a display at the top. And is that not what we are seeing here? Which raises another big question. Is like, okay, is this really an ASUS controller, or is this something that Microsoft built and then offered to ASUS to build, or was it a partnership? Clearly there was some level of partnership because it works and has an Xbox branding and everything else. But considering the fact that Microsoft got the patent for this, whose controller is it? Is it just Microsoft saying, look, here's a device that you can go build, have fun, or something like that? We don't know. We don't know the full story, but maybe that was part of the arrangement for getting this deal, is that Microsoft was able to own the patent for this particular device. So just something to keep in mind here, that maybe, just maybe, this device right here, this patent, isn't designed for Microsoft's, what I initially thought was potentially their direct to the cloud connection controller for cloud gaming. It still could be, but I think the timing is a little suspect, if I'm honest. If I'm honest here. So, which brings up another big question, my friends. Who is this controller for? Because part of me thinks, man, it's for PC gaming, but then what is the 2.4 gigahertz RF mode for? That is a crowning feature of their tri-mode connectivity for this device, which makes me think that maybe they're also going to be pitching this at people who have the directly connected cloud TVs, the cloud gaming TVs from like Samsung and other vendors, where you can say, hey, Xbox Cloud Gaming, you need a high-end controller. Here it is. You could buy this thing and it'll connect directly to the TV, and you don't have to worry about anything else in between. Now, that's an interesting thought, because Microsoft is pushing this cloud gaming on their TVs pretty heavily. Samsung announced more TVs at CES, and so they're not backing away from this model. By all means, I would not expect them to do that anyways. And so would a controller like this be targeted at that type of demographic? And I don't think it is. I don't think it is, which makes me still confused as what the 2.4 gigahertz RF mode is specifically for. Potentially, maybe they're going to sell their own dongle. The reason why I don't think this is a cloud gaming targeted controller or user group is, let's pretend we know the price. Like, what is the price for something that has an OLED display on it? This controller cannot be cheap. This is not going to be a $79 controller. I would be very surprised, considering it has an OLED display, there's RGB built in, and ASUS has to make money on it. So I'm thinking this thing is like $150 at minimum. Like, that seems like a palatable price point for something like this. And if you're going to be spending $150 on a high-end controller to play cloud gaming, spend the extra $50 and get a Series S at $199 when you can find them. The pricing gets a little dicey when you get into the high-end elite controller style controllers, I should say, specifically for cloud gaming, because then just buy the console and you'll get a better experience, in my opinion. And I think that opinion is pretty well invalidated. So either way, super interesting controller. I'm going to be curious to see if we see more of these high-end controllers coming from these gaming vendors trying to get more peripherals. We've seen some from the likes of Razer as well, I should say. And so it's not unprecedented, but this one seems to be more premium, more top end, more trying to go for that home run of a key peripheral thing. And I think it's an interesting market, because think about how expensive some of the SCUF controllers are. I mean, $200 for a controller isn't unreasonable these days for people who really want the best of the best. And so there's definitely a market. I mean, we see people spend on their gaming PCs $1,000 or more for a GPU. So what's another $200 to get that type of an individual who's paying for the high-end Radeon, the high-end NVIDIA cards to grab something like this? I think it's more than possible that we will see more controllers come out like this. I don't know if Dell would get into it. Dell's been leaning much more enterprise heavy, but you could see like an Omen controller or something like that. And so there's plenty of gaming PCs. EVGA, would they do something like this? Although they're kind of waffling around with some of those NVIDIA cards that we don't know. We will see. I think there's a lot of potential for that display on there. I'll be curious to see, even though this is a Microsoft patent and now we think that it involves this controller, I will be very curious to see if Microsoft ever comes out with something like this. But I think this adds more credence to the idea that Microsoft probably isn't shipping an Elite Series 3 controller this year. The reason why, again, they got things into the design lab, and it would be kind of jerkish to say, here you go, ASUS, here's your controller with the modeling and everything else. And by the way, bro, when you release this thing at an undetermined date sometime later this year, we're going to drop a Series 3 Elite controller that's just going to trounce you in every single possible way. Like, that doesn't... Microsoft is very OEM friendly, very partner friendly. They've always been that way. Granted, I'm sure some partners will come in and complain about various aspects, but Microsoft typically wouldn't do something like launch that controller and then come out with their own thing immediately following in the same timeline. So Either way, we'll see. We will see. I think a good high quality peripheral, there's a market for that in the console and PC gaming space. We know that from high end keyboards and everything else. So, as always, my friends, if you want to stay updated on everything happening in the world of Xbox, Microsoft, and beyond, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.